There is a smell I will never forget. Tim Hortons coffee going cold in the cup holder, and the sound of my aunt's rings tapping against the steering wheel. Not nervous tapping, deliberate. The kind of rhythm a person keeps when they have already made a decision and are just waiting for the right moment to announce it. I was 22 years old and sitting in the passenger seat of her SUV, watching the highway signs tick past on the way to Pearson Airport, thinking we were going to pick someone up. That is what she had told me that morning. Said she needed help with the luggage. Said my cousin was flying in from Vancouver. I had no reason not to believe her. I had spent my whole life not questioning the things she told me. She pulled into departures. Not arrivals, I noticed. I did not say anything yet. I watched her put the car in park and reach across me to open the glove compartment. She pulled out an envelope and set it on my lap without looking at me. Inside was a one-way ticket to a place called Hartley Cove, a small fishing town on the eastern coast of Nova Scotia that I had never heard of in my life. Beneath the ticket was a folded piece of paper with an address written in handwriting I did not recognize. I looked up at her. She was staring straight ahead through the windshield. She said, "Your mother wanted you to have this when you turned 22. She made me promise." My mother had been dead for 4 years. I did not cry right away. There is a kind of shock that sits behind your sternum and presses outward slowly, like water finding a crack. I felt that. I held the envelope and I felt that quiet, spreading pressure, and I did not know what to do with my hands, she said. "The ticket is for this afternoon. You should go inside." I asked her what was in Hartley Cove. She said she did not know. I asked her if that was the truth. She did not answer. She reached past me and pushed the door handle open from the inside. Not violently, but clearly. I got out. I stood on the curb with my overnight bag, the only thing I had packed for what I thought was a 20-minute drive, and I watched her pull away into the departures loop without once checking the rearview mirror. The sliding glass doors of the terminal opened behind me, and I just stood there. A porter asked if I needed help. I said no. I said I was fine. I was not fine. But the word comes out on its own when someone asks, like a reflex you develop before you even know you needed it. I went inside. I sat down at a row of seats near the check-in counter and I opened the folded piece of paper again. The address. A street I did not recognize, and beneath it in my mother's handwriting, 4 words I recognized immediately because she had the most distinctive lowercase r I have ever seen, curved inward slightly like it was trying to protect itself. It said, "She has been waiting." I stared at those words for a long time. Long enough that the announcement for my flight came over the speaker and I still had not moved. I did not know who she was. I did not know what she was waiting for. I did not know why my mother, who had been quiet and careful and private in the way only people carrying something heavy can be, had arranged for me to find out only after she was gone, and only when I was 22. I checked in. I went through security. I ate half a sandwich I did not taste. And when they called my row, I got on that plane, because the only thing worse than going to a place I did not know was staying in a city where I now understood I had never been fully seen. The flight connected through Halifax. By the time the small regional prop plane banked low over the coastline and I saw the Atlantic for the first time, gray and enormous, and completely indifferent to my confusion, something in me went very quiet. Not peaceful. Just still. The way a person goes still when they realize the situation is bigger than anything they could have anticipated. The Hartley Cove Airport was barely an airport. A single gate. 12 seats. A woman in an orange vest waving the plane in from the tarmac. I was the only passenger who deplaned there. The pilot thanked me by name because he had seen it on the manifest, and there was no one else to thank. She was standing just inside the door, an older woman, maybe late 60s, with short silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was holding a piece of cardboard that had been torn from what looked like a cereal box, and on it, written in blue marker, was my first name. Just my first name. Like she already knew the rest. I stopped walking. My whole chest tightened. She looked at me the way you look at something you have been afraid you would never actually see. Not with surprise. With the very particular relief of someone who has been holding their breath for a long, long time and has finally been allowed to let it out. She said, "You have your grandmother's eyes. I would have known you anywhere." I did not know I had a grandmother. Her name was Ruth. She drove a 10-year-old Subaru that smelled like sea salt and old paperbacks, and she handled the narrow coastal roads with the ease of someone who had driven them for decades. She did not rush to explain things. She asked if I was hungry. She asked if the flight had been rough. She said the town had a good fish chowder place that was still open, and that some things were better said over food than in a car. I agreed mostly because I did not trust my voice to ask the questions I actually had. The restaurant was called The Anchor, and it was the kind of place where the booths have been repaired so many times. The vinyl is different colors in different sections, and nobody thinks anything of it. Ruth ordered for both of us without asking, 2 bowls of chowder, brown bread, tea. She folded her hands on the table and she looked at me steadily and she said, I am going to tell you everything, but I want you to eat something first because what I'm going to say is going to take a while and I don't want you going through it on an empty stomach. I said, okay. I meant it. She began with my mother. Not with me. That is the part I want to be clear about. Because when I replay that evening in my mind, it is always my mother's story that comes first. And it matters that it came first. Because everything else only makes sense once you understand who my mother was before she became the woman I knew. My mother was 20 years old when she got pregnant with me. She was living in Halifax at the time, studying nursing, working weekends at a waterfront cafe, the kind of life that is hard in the way that young and hopeful lives are hard. Which is to say it was mostly fine. My biological father was a man named Garrett. He was not a bad man, Ruth said, but he was young and he panicked and he left before I was born. And whatever wound that opened in my mother, she closed very quickly and very permanently and did not discuss again. What my mother did not tell me, what she apparently did not tell anyone except Ruth, was that when I was 3 months old, she called her own mother for the first time in 2 years. I had not known she had a mother at all. She had told me, for as long as I could remember asking, that her parents were both gone. She had said it matter-of-factly and moved on, and I had learned not to press, the same way I had learned not to ask about the box in her closet that was always padlocked, or why she sometimes stood at the kitchen window for long stretches doing nothing. The truth was that my grandmother, Ruth, had been very much alive this entire time. And the reason my mother had cut contact 2 years before I was born, the reason she had spent years maintaining a fiction that cost her something every single day, was sitting across from me now eating brown bread and choosing her words with care. My aunt, my mother's older sister, the woman who had dropped me at the departure's curb that morning without looking back. Ruth put down her spoon. She said, when your mother was 18 and I was still working long hours, your aunt became the person who managed things at home. And for a time that was fine. But your aunt has always had a particular relationship with control and with what she believes she is owed, and when your mother got older and started making her own choices, the situation became very difficult. I asked her to be more specific. Ruth looked at me for a moment. Then she said, your mother received a small inheritance from her grandfather when she turned 18. It was not a large amount. $12,000. Enough to help with school with a start. Your aunt told her it had been mismanaged, that there was nothing left. Your mother believed her for years. She paused. It was not true. I set my spoon down. Ruth said, my mother had not found out until she was 23, when a letter from the estate lawyer arrived at the wrong address and got forwarded twice before landing at the cafe where she worked. By then the money was long gone, and the trail was complicated enough that pursuing it would have cost more than what remained. What my mother did instead was stop speaking to her sister entirely. She moved. She rebuilt. She made a life from scratch in Ontario, which is where she eventually met my stepfather, and where I grew up believing that family was just the 3 of us and whatever we made of it. She had called Ruth once, 3 months after I was born. She had said she was sorry for disappearing. She had said she needed to know Ruth was okay. She had said she was not ready to come back, and she was not sure she ever would be, but that she wanted someone in the family to know that she had a daughter, that I existed. And she had given Ruth my name. Ruth had written it down. She had kept that piece of paper for 22 years. She reached into her cardigan pocket and put it on the table between us. A small torn scrap, the edges soft with age. My name and the date I was born, written in my grandmother's handwriting. I could not speak for a while. Ruth did not try to fill the silence. She understood, I think, that some moments need to be sat with rather than smoothed over. She poured more tea. She waited. Outside, the harbor was going dark, the lights from the boats starting to come on one by one. When I could talk again, I asked her why now. Why 22? Why not earlier? Why not at 18? Why not at 16 when I might have had more time with my mother before she got sick? Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, because your mother was afraid. She said it plainly, without apology, and I respected her for that. My mother had been afraid that if she opened this door while she was alive, my aunt would find a way to close it again. My aunt had spent decades managing my mother's access to her own history, to her own family, to her own money. My mother had not trusted that she could protect me from the same thing. So she had waited. She had set a date. She had made Ruth promise to hold the ticket and the address and the note until I was old enough that my aunt could not legally or practically interfere. She had spent the last year of her life knowing she was sick and making very careful arrangements. I thought about all the times I had sat at the kitchen table doing homework while my mother moved quietly around the house. All the times I had thought she was simply reserved, simply private, simply the kind of person who kept things close. I had never once thought that what she was keeping was a whole other life. A mother she missed, a history she had been separated from, a grief she had decided to carry alone rather than put it anywhere near me. The chowder had gone cold. Neither of us had finished it. Ruth said there was a room for me at her house. She said it carefully, without pressure, making clear it was an offer and not an assumption. She said she understood if I needed time before deciding anything. She said she had waited 22 years and she was not going anywhere. I said I would stay. We drove back along the coast road, and I watched the water moving below the cliff edge and tried to understand what it felt like to arrive somewhere. You have never been and feel, not quite comfortable, but something in the vicinity of belonging. Like your body recognizes something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. Her house was a small Cape Cod style, white with dark green shutters, set back from the road with a short gravel path and a garden that was still going despite the October chill. There were lights on inside, warm and yellow through the front windows. She showed me to a room upstairs. It had a quilt on the bed that was clearly handmade, blue and green squares in a pattern I later learned was a traditional Nova Scotia design. There was a shelf with books. There was a photograph on the dresser, turned face down. She picked it up before I could and set it on the shelf instead, face up now, and said, "I thought maybe you would want to see her young." It was my mother, maybe 17 years old, standing on what I recognized now as the dock I had seen from the restaurant window, laughing at something off camera. Her hair shorter than I had ever seen it. Her whole face open in a way I was not sure I had ever seen in person. I sat down on the edge of the bed and held that photograph for a long time. Ruth said good night. She pulled the door almost closed, and I heard her move quietly down the hallway, and I understood that she was the kind of person who knows when someone needs to be alone with something. I stayed in Hartley Cove for 11 days that first visit. On the third day, Ruth showed me the letters. There was a wooden box on the shelf in her sewing room, cedar, with a small brass latch, and inside were 22 cards. One for every year of my life, never sent. She had written one each year on my birthday. Not long letters. Some were just a few lines. Some were longer, the years when she had clearly had more to say. She had written about the town, about the seasons, about small things she thought I might like. The way the ice breaks up in the harbor in April, the summer festival where people sell preserves and handmade quilts, the particular color of the sky in November that she had never been able to describe exactly, but that she had attempted at least 4 times across various cards. I read all 22 in one sitting on the floor of that sewing room while Ruth pretended to be very busy in the kitchen. By the 5th day, I had stopped waking up in the night. By the 8th day, I was helping Ruth put up the storm windows, and she was telling me about my mother as a teenager, the good things and the difficult things both, and I was learning to hold a version of my mother I had never had access to. A younger version. A version who had been someone's daughter in a house by the sea before she became my mother in a city apartment, keeping everything carefully contained. On the 10th day, I asked Ruth about my aunt, about whether she knew what my mother had arranged. Whether the ticket, the timing, all of it, had been a surprise or something else. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She was drying a bowl, and she kept drying it longer than necessary. Then she said, "I think your aunt knew. I think she has known for some time that your mother left instructions. I think putting you on that plane herself was the one thing she could do that let her feel like it was still her decision." I sat with that. There is something very particular about understanding that someone who hurt you is also in their own way a person who has been living with something heavy. I do not say that to excuse my aunt. What she did to my mother was a wound that shaped years of my mother's life, and by extension years of mine. But I had spent the drive to the airport thinking I was being discarded, and what I was beginning to understand instead was that I had been delivered. Badly, selfishly, without apology or explanation, but delivered nonetheless. I still have not had a direct conversation with my aunt. I have thought about what I would say, and I have decided that what I need from her is not something she is currently able to give. That may change. I leave the door cracked rather than shut it completely. because my mother taught me, without words, that shutting doors entirely is its own kind of weight to carry. What I know now, at 29 years old, is that I have a grandmother who writes me letters on my birthday, even though she now has my phone number and email address, and could simply text me a string of cake emojis like any other person. She still writes the cards. She says it is a habit she has no intention of breaking. I went back to Hartley Cove the following summer for 3 weeks. I met people in town who had known my mother as a girl, and who said her name with that particular warmth reserved for someone who was loved in a place, before they disappeared from it. I learned to clean fish properly, which is a skill I hope I never have to use but am genuinely glad to have. I ate my weight in seafood chowder. I sat on Ruth's porch in the evenings and watched the water and felt something I do not have a precise word for, something in the territory of returned. I did not know I was missing a family. I thought what I had was simply the shape of things, that the particular loneliness of my childhood was just the nature of a quiet household and a private mother. I did not know there was a version of things where someone had been waiting, where someone had kept a box of cards on a shelf and written my name on a scrap of paper and held on to it for 22 years against the possibility that someday the door would open. My mother made a lot of choices I do not fully understand. She carried things in a way that left me outside of them, and there are moments even now when I feel the edges of that exclusion and have to breathe through it. But she also did something in those last careful months that I think about often. She could not give me Ruth while she was alive without risking my aunt's interference. So she gave me Ruth the only way she was sure she could protect. She arranged it so that someone would be waiting at the other end. My aunt thought she was ending a chapter when she dropped me at departures. My mother thought differently. She had spent years building quiet protection into the plan, tucking instructions into envelopes, making Ruth promise, setting the date, making sure that what she could not give me in life would find its way to me after. The destination was not just a town on the eastern coast of Nova Scotia. It was the answer to a question I had never known how to ask. It was a grandmother with silver hair and a box of birthday cards and 22 years of patience. It was a photograph of my mother laughing at something off camera when she was 17, and the whole world was still in front of her. It was the first place in my life that felt like it had been waiting for me specifically. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful I got on that plane.